So today I'm going to show you my killer tier list. The strongest killers will be placed on top of the chart and the weakest ones will be on the bottom. I will go through the roster starting from the oldest killer to the most recent one. Keep in mind that everything I say is based purely on my personal opinion, so yeah, that being said, let's start with the first killer on the list. The Trapper. So the Trapper heavily relies on his power to catch survivors. The worst thing about that is that his traps are very RNG based. This means that even if you catch a survivor with one of your bear traps, there is still a chance that they will get away. In addition to that, the Trapper often needs to walk long distances to grab his bear traps that will spawn scattered around the map. He will also need to waste time setting down the traps that can be easily disarmed by survivors, if they will be able to spot them. Despite all, the Trapper can still be a threat, especially against not organized team, that will much more easily end up in one of his traps. The Trapper can also prevent the looping of very strong buildings. For example, a well-hidden trap near the shack will most likely deny the looping of said building, or will grant a free hook. All things considered, I will place the Trapper in the low tier section of my list. The WRAITH. WRAITH is basically what people call an M1 killer, forced to down survivors only with his basic attacks. The good thing about him is that he can often use his power to catch survivors off guard. That way, he should be able to get at least a free hit before starting the chase. Unfortunately, experienced survivors will most likely see him coming and run to the closest loop. The WRAITH heavily relies on mind games to catch survivors, but by using his power correctly, he will be able to force a pallet drop before other killers. I will place the WRAITH in the low tier category too. The HILLBILLY. The HILLBILLY is in my opinion one of the strongest killers in game. His chainsaw doesn't only help him moving around the map very quickly and give him a huge map control, but it will also put any survivor in the dying state after a single hit. His great strength doesn't come from his anti-looping abilities, as he is pretty much as any other killer in that sense, but comes from the fact that he can easily catch survivors off guard and put an end to the chase before it even begins. If survivors are found out of position, meaning that there are no pallets or windows around them, they're pretty much screwed. For all of these reasons, I will place the HILLBILLY in the high tier section of my list. The Nurse. Nurse is arguably the best killer in Dead by Daylight. She completely ignores the rules of the game, as she cannot be looped. She is also one of the few killers that doesn't rely on survivors' mistakes. When in chase, she can still be countered a bit by breaking the line of sight with her, or by changing direction at the very last moment before she blinks. But for the most part, it's all on her hands. Because of that, I give the Nurse a top tier slot in my list. The Shape. Myers can use his power to gain the ability of one-hitting survivors and put them immediately in the dying state for a short period of time. It's great, but unfortunately it's pretty much all it does. Yeah, he can also vault windows slightly faster and his lunge covers a bit more distance than other killers when he reaches his max power. But he has no anti-loop abilities and he will still have to heavily rely on mind games if he doesn't want to be looped till daylight. I think that Myers is generally very overrated, and people never take in consideration the time Myers has to waste stalking survivors to actually get his power working. I will put him in the low tier section of my list. The Hag. The Hag is slightly slower than a normal killer, but her power allows her to place up to 10 traps around the map, and incredibly, she doesn't have to walk around to gather them. In addition to that, her base terror radius is smaller than normal, so that it's easier for her to sneak up on survivors. In any case, you don't really want to spend too much time chasing survivors with the hag. The best thing to do is just to set as many traps as you can in the places you think the survivors will run to. That way, when an injured survivor will step on your trap, you will get a free down. She can also snowball very easily and turn an already lost game in a winnable one in very few seconds. Despite all, the hag can still be countered pretty hard by organized teams of survivors that will constantly trigger your traps or destroy them with a flashlight. All things considered, I will place her in the mid-tier section of my list. The Doctor. The Doctor can be annoying to survivors by putting them in madness. When mad, the survivors will see things they couldn't care less. At Madness 3, the annoyance of the Doctor will be that great that survivors will have to waste some seconds to get rid of it and just go back walking on gens. Okay, jokes aside, the Doctor can't really do much to prevent looping, and his power is just a little inconvenient for the most experienced survivors. He also relies a lot on his add-ons, and without them, he is almost completely useless. He is the first killer to get a free ticket for the bottom tier section of my list. The Huntress. Huntress is one of the few killers who can hit survivors from a distance. That gives her a great advantage that comes with the cost of a limited movement speed. She can still be pretty scary in the right hands, even if she can be looped pretty hard, and she is one of the most susceptible killers to a bad map design. If a Huntress is forced to deal with a very good time waster repeatedly, that could cost her the game. A good player can still put an end to a game real quickly if the survivors give them a chance. The Huntress has a great snowballing potential, and that has to be taken in consideration. I believe the Huntress belong to the mid-tier section of this list. The Cannibal. Leatherface has a chainsaw, just like the Hillbilly, but for some reason he can't really use it to fly around the map. I think he's a sort of a cheap version of the Hillbilly, but because he is still able to one-hit survivors that are out of position, I believe he deserves a spot in the low-tier section of my list. The Nightmare. Freddy has never been so strong. After their work, he can patrol generators very easily, which means that he has a much more stronger map control than most of the other killers. Not only that, he can also slow down survivors at loops in a very efficient way. That allows him to catch survivors real quick. He can also trade his power of slowing down survivors with the ability of placing down fake pallets that confuse the survivors and most likely force them to waste time running to an alarm clock to wake up. His add-ons are also incredibly good. All things considered, I think the new Freddy deserves a place in the mid-tier section of my list. The Pig. Amanda is one of the most underrated killers in Dead by Daylight in my opinion. Most people never really use her ability to dash to deny loops, but she can be really effective at downing people that way, especially when survivors think they're sitting on a safe pallet. Her anti-loop capabilities are for sure her strongest ally, but she can also sneak up on survivors to get free hits, and her traps are amazing at slowing down the game. I think Amanda belongs to the mid-tier section of the list. The Clown. The Clown to me feels like a cheap version of Freddy. His power works pretty much as Freddy's snare traps, with the only difference that his gas has a larger area of effect and can affect survivors all the times, even if they're not asleep. Unfortunately, the Clown can't control the map the same way Freddy does, and this makes him very weak. With very poor anti-loop capabilities and nothing else to offer, the only way for the Clown to be somewhat decent is to rely on his ultra-rare add-on that allows him to one-hit survivors immediately after a precise bottle throw. Personally, I don't think that's enough to consider the Clown nearly as viable as other killers. That's the reason I put him in the bottom of this tier list. The Spirit. I consider the Spirit the second best killer in game. She can end chases fast and her power allows her to move around the map real quickly. She can't really be looped, because if survivors decide to sit on a pallet when in chase, she can just do a 50-50 mind game on them that will eventually end up in a successful hit. Running away is not a good choice either, as she can just track your movement while phasing. If you are injured, that's even worse, as she can easily hear you. Even her add-ons are great. The Spirit surely deserves a spot in the top tier section of my list. The Legion. Legion is just annoying, just like Doctor. His power aims to slow down survivors as much as possible, but it doesn't really have any good anti-looping capabilities. He relies heavily on survivors' mistakes, as he needs to hope that survivors will be that naive to stay close to each other while he uses his power. His add-ons don't even help that much. In this current state, Legion might even be the worst killer in game, and for now I will put him at the bottom of the list. The Plague. The Plague can infect survivors with her power and put them in the broken status effect. At that point, survivors can choose if spending the rest of the game like that or healing back to normal in exchange of giving the Plague a very powerful ranged attack. In both cases, the Plague can be very strong, especially if played with the right build and add-ons. The best situation for the Plague is having only some survivor cleansing while the others decide not to, but of course that's not up to the Plague. In that situation, for the survivors is pretty much GG. Even if that is not going to happen, the Plague can still be a threat, and even organized team can have an hard time dealing with her. Having 4 constantly injured survivors, or having a devastating ranged attack available is in both cases exceptional for the killer, and that's why I believe the Plague belongs to the mid-tier section of the list. The GHOSTFACE. GHOSTFACE is the last killer introduced in Dead by Daylight. His power reminds a bit the one of Myers, but it has different strengths and weaknesses. One of the strengths is that GHOSTFACE can suppress his terror radius completely to sneak up on survivors, or that he can stalk survivors way more quickly than Myers, but the weaknesses are that he needs to stalk the survivors individually, and that he can be revealed by survivors who can make his power unusable for a limited amount of time. At the end of the day, I decided to put him in the low tier section of the list, as I feel he is pretty much as deadly as the other killers I placed there. So that's my tier list for the killers currently available in Dead by Daylight. I know it's a bit weird to see a whole space reserved to the HILLBILLY, but I still believe he is way better than the average killer, even if he can't compete with the 2 other killers on top of him. Anyways, let me know your opinion in the comments and what you would have changed. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video.